I woke up at 12:58 a.m. to the roar of concrete trucks in my backyard. And by lunchtime the next day, a state officer had a stop work order in her hand, while the HOA president was screaming my name like I'd committed a crime. Yeah, that happened. A week after that, the same woman who told me my grief was a community standards issue was being walked away from a microphone in front of a packed clubhouse, still trying to blame me for the mess she made. And the part that keeps me up sometimes is how close she came to pulling it off. Because if you've ever been dismissed, labeled, or quietly shoved aside by someone with money and a clipboard, you know what I mean? My name's Cal Dawson. I'm 57, retired, and I live outside Knoxville on a narrow slice of land that backs up to Copperleaf Creek. It's not some postcard river. It's a thin ribbon of cold water over stones, shaded by sycamores and stubborn little willows, the kind of creek you don't think about until you need it. And I needed it after my younger brother Tyler died. Tyler used to skip rocks there when we were kids, and later, after life got heavy, he'd still come by with a six-pack and sit on the bank like the water could rinse off whatever was stuck to his ribs. When he passed, that creek became the only place my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. I planted 2 small maples near the bend, set a flat stone with his name on it. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just something that said he was here and he mattered. And for a long time, it was quiet. I'd drink coffee out there, listen to the water, talk to him like a lunatic, because grief makes you do what grief makes you do. And nobody bothered me. Then, upstream, a gated neighborhood went in, called Briarstone Ridge. Big new houses, bright white fences, lawns cut so short they looked painted a clubhouse that looked like a hotel lobby. And of course they formed an HOA, because if you build a gate, you also build a little kingdom behind it. Most of those folks never came down my way, and I didn't need them to. But then Heather Van Doren got elected president, and suddenly my little creek wasn't a creek anymore. It was a drainage corridor. It was a community asset. It was a liability. It was whatever word she needed that day to make it sound like she owned it. The first time I met Heather was 6:04 a.m. On a Saturday, she knocked like she was serving a warrant, clipboard tucked to her chest. A guy behind her filming on his phone like I was about to do something worth posting. She didn't say good morning. She didn't say sorry to wake you. She just smiled and said, "Dawson, you're in violation." And I remember blinking at her like, "Lady, I haven't even brushed my teeth." Violation of what I asked, and she turned the clipboard around like she was showing me a menu. Unauthorized landscaping within a riparian buffer. Also unapproved signage. Signage, I said, and she nodded toward Tyler's stone. That, and I said, "That's my brother's memorial." And she did this little head tilt, like I was a kid trying to explain why I drew on the wall. Personal memorials aren't exempt from community standards, she said, and I told her calmly, because I'm not proud of losing my temper, and I try not to. I'm not in your HOA, and she gave me that smile that never reaches the eyes. Copperleaf Creek is part of our drainage corridor. Briarstone has an easement, she said. Like the word easement was a spell. Remove the stone and the trees within 72 hours, or we assess $750 per day. $750 a day for my brother's name, and I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't shout. I just said, "You can't find me." And she stepped closer, voice softer, meaner. "Watch us," she said. Then she turned and walked back toward the gate, like she'd just done her good deed for the morning. 2 weeks later, we got one of those Tennessee rains that doesn't fall. It attacks, and up at Briarstone, their clubhouse patio had puddles not flooding, not dangerous, just ugly. And Heather can't stand ugly, because ugly doesn't sell. And that's what this was really about. Property values listings. The idea of perfection. You can put in a brochure. So she decided the creek needed fixing. Not with permits, not with engineers, not with anyone whose job is to tell you no, but with contractors who will do what you pay them to do. And that's how my backyard turned into a construction site at 12:58 a.m. I woke up to light blasting through the curtains like a stadium diesel, rumbling men shouting over engines. And when I ran outside in a hoodie and boots, half awake, my creek was framed up like a driveway. Wooden forms set across the flow. Rebar poking out a truck backing in. And the smell of wet cement hit me so hard, it felt like it coated my tongue. I yelled, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" And this foreman barely looked at me. "HOA work order." "Sir, emergency mosquito mitigation," he said. Like pouring concrete into a creek was some kind of health service. And then Heather stepped into the light, fully dressed, coffee in hand, like she'd been up all night planning my misery. I pointed at the forms. "You're blocking Copperleaf Creek." And she shrugged. "We're redirecting it. Standing water attracts bugs. Our residents pay a lot to live here. And the way she said pay a lot wasn't information. It was a threat, like money. Buys the right to rearrange the world," I said. "That water goes to my property," and she took a sip and said, "Then maybe you shouldn't have bought land by a creek like I'd chosen this, to inconvenience her." By morning, my crawl space was damp. The soil around Tyler's stone turned to mush. The creek started biting into my bank like it was hungry. And I watched the water press and swirl in places it never swirled before, like the whole thing was confused. I called Heather, and she answered. "Like she'd been waiting," I said. "My house is taking on water. Your wall did this." And she made this sympathetic noise that sounded trained. "I'm sorry. You're experiencing moisture?" "Cal, but Briarstone isn't responsible for your home maintenance. We improved drainage for community safeties," and I said. "You poured concrete into a creek," and her voice went cold. "If you continue harassing our contractors, security will escort you away." And that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a neighbor. I was dealing with a person who sees everything like a transaction, and if you can't be bought, you get erased. So I documented. Because arguing with someone like Heather is like yelling at a locked door. I took photos. I shot video. I marked where the flow was cutting my bank. I saved every HOA email, every notice, every smug little "We appreciate your cooperation" message, and I filed a complaint with the county stormwater office with one simple question. Who authorized work in a stream at 12:58 a.m.? A county inspector named Trent Alvarez called me and said I'll swing by Friday, and I felt this tiny flicker of relief. Like, okay, adults are arriving. Rules still exist. Friday came. No Trent. I called the office and the receptionist put me on hold long enough to make coffee. Then she came back and said, "He completed the site visit yesterday. No violations, case closed." And my stomach dropped because the concrete was still there. You could see it with your eyes. "He never came to my property," I said, and she paused. "He observed from multiple vantage points," and I remember repeating it like an idiot. Multiple vantage points, because I didn't know what else to say, and then it hit me. He didn't miss it, he ignored it. I drove up toward Briarstone and parked outside their gate on the public road, and Heather found me fast security at her shoulder, smiling like she'd caught me stealing. she said. Looks like the county already handled it, and I said. He didn't inspect my side, and Heather leaned in. Just a little, like she wanted me to smell her perfume, and she whispered maybe he saw everything he needed from our side. Efficient, right? And that whisper made my skin crawl, because it wasn't just confidence, it was control. A couple days later, I sat on that same public road with my phone and a decent camera, feeling ridiculous. And I watched Heather walk up to Trent's county vehicle like they were old friends, and she handed him a thick white envelope. He tucked it into his jacket like it was normal, like he'd done it 100 times. And my hands shook so bad, I almost dropped the camera, but the photo came out clean, and I sat there staring at it thinking, that's what this is. This isn't a mistake. It's a purchase. And then Heather did what people like her do when facts won't cooperate. She went after my credibility. Sunday night, my neighbor called, voice low. Cal, 2 women asked if you've been confused lately. Monday, the county left a message about a possible wellness check because I was unstable and aggressive, and that one hit deep because grief already makes you question yourself. You already feel like a raw nerve, and she was trying to turn that into a muzzle. I sat at my kitchen table listening to that voicemail again, staring at Tyler's stone out the window, and for a minute I felt small, like maybe I should just let it go, move the memorial, eat the loss, because fighting a system feels like punching fog. Then I walked outside, and the creek smelled wrong, muddy and sharp, and I watched a chunk of my bank slough off into the water, and something in me hardened. Not rage exactly, more like clarity. Like, no, you don't get to do this. Not here. Not to him. Not to me. I called my cousin Jenna in Nashville. She's an environmental attorney, and she doesn't do polite fear. She looked at my evidence and said, okay, we're going around the county, and we filed a packet with the state, unpermitted stream impact, sediment discharge, suspected interference, and 2 days later, I got the email that changed the air in my lungs. Inspection scheduled Tuesday at 9:00 a.m. State officer and biologist. That's where Heather started to panic, because county people can be bought in her world, but state folks are harder, and biology doesn't care about your HOA newsletter. The night before the inspection, I woke up at 2:11 a.m. to jackhammer Clank's work lights again, and I stumbled outside, and there they were breaking the wall apart and tossing chunks into the creek, muddying the water like they were shredding evidence. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I filmed every second, because at that point, my anger had turned into something colder, more focused. Like, keep going. Show me who you are. Tuesday morning, 2 state vehicles pulled up near my driveway. The officer introduced herself as Dana Whitaker, calm professional. The kind of person who listens more than she talks. The biologist with her was Kendra Shaw. Waiters, gloves, that quiet intensity. People get when truth matters more than comfort, and Heather arrived in a blazer and heels holding a folder, like it was armor. She went straight to Dana with a bright fake smile. I'm Heather Van Doren, HOA president. We're happy to cooperate, but this is really just one resident with a personal issue. And Dana said, we're here about unpermitted stream modification. Like she'd said it 1,000 times, and Kendra was already kneeling by the water, touching the soil, looking at the debris, tracking the disturbance like it told a story. Heather kept trying to steer it. Our community had standing water near the clubhouse. We acted for safety, and Kendra stood up and said, there's fresh disturbance debris and saturated soil. Response, plus sediment movement. We're documenting impacts along the corridor, and Dana asked the simplest question in the world. Do you have permits for any work in the stream? Heather produced meeting minutes and emergency mitigation memos. Like paperwork was a magic trick. Dana flipped through and said, "I don't see a permit," and Heather's voice sharpened. We had verbal approval from the county, and I couldn't stop myself. I laughed once bitter. Verbal approval at 12:58 a.m. Heather snapped toward me. This is what I mean. He's emotionally unstable, and that was the moment I saw the whole pattern clear as day. She couldn't win on facts, so she had to win on labels. And I didn't bite. I just handed Dana my folder. Here's the pour, the diversion, the midnight demolition, and the county inspector receiving an envelope from Ms. Van Doren. And Heather's smile twitched like a crack in glass. Dana didn't accuse. She didn't get dramatic, she just said, "Ma'am, step back." While we continue the assessment, and Heather hates step back. She stepped closer anyway, lowered her voice like she was offering a deal. "Officer Whitaker, our community supports compliance. We can make a donation to your office. We can resolve this without making it a big thing." And Dana took one step away, like she'd been touched by something dirty. "Are you offering something of value to influence an inspection?" Heather froze, tried to laugh. "I'm just saying we're cooperative." And Dana said, "We're issuing a stop work order. Any further disturbance will be treated as a violation. Our investigation is expanding." And Heather's voice jumped. "You can't do that to us. Do you know what our residents pay?" Dana answered, steady as stone. "The stream doesn't care what you pay." And I swear, I felt something inside me unclench like a knot. I'd been carrying since Tyler's funeral loosened just a little. That afternoon, Briarstone held an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse, and you could feel the panic before you even walked in. People in polo shirts and tennis skirts whispering about wetlands and permits and values. Heather grabbed the microphone and tried to make it about me. "This is one resident with a personal crusade," she said. "He has a history of emotional instability." And I watched faces in the crowd, some skeptical, some ready to believe her, because it's easier to blame one guy than confront a corrupt system. And then Dana walked in with Kendra. And the air changed instantly. Dana addressed the board. "Stop work order is active. Investigation is open. We are also reviewing allegations of interference with enforcement." And people started shouting, "What does this mean for our property values? Can we sue? Who approved this?" Heather tried to talk over them. "This is temporary. We'll appeal." And I stood up, knees shaking. A little voice steadier than I expected, and I said, "You fined me for my brother's name. You poured concrete into the creek at night. You tried to label me unstable when I wouldn't shut up. I'm not asking for attention. I'm asking you to stop letting one person treat the rest of us like we're disposable." And there was this beat of silence where you could hear the HVAC hum. Then the board chair, Mark Givens, finally said it. "Heather, you're suspended pending investigation." Heather stared at him like he'd spoken another language. "You can't suspend me," and Mark said. "We just did, and right." Then 2 investigators came in, calm clipboards, no theatrics, and asked Heather to step away from the microphone to answer questions about reported interference. And Heather pointed at me, voice suddenly smaller. "This is his fault," and she kept saying it as they guided her away, like repeating it could make it true. Now here's where it gets messy, because life doesn't end with a neat bow. And this is the part I want you to sit with and argue about in the comments a week after. All that, I got 2 kinds of messages once set. thanked me quietly, like people who'd been holding their breath for years. They said Heather bullied them over paint colors and fence heights and grass length. They said she threatened liens. They said she made them feel stupid in meetings. They said, "Thank you for standing up." And the other set was furious. They told me I ruined their investment. They told me I hurt families who didn't pour concrete. They told me I should have just moved, stayed quiet, let it go, because the fallout didn't only hit Heather. It hit everyone behind that gate. And I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. So I'll leave you with this. Honestly, because I still wrestle with it. If stopping a bully also hits bystanders, is it still justice? Or is it collateral damage, dressed up as virtue? And when someone can weaponize the idea of mental instability against a grieving person to win, what does that say about the prejudice we still accept when it's convenient? Drop your verdict below, right or wrong. Did I push too hard? Or not hard enough? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that acted like a private government, or if you think HOAs are the only thing keeping neighbors from chaos, I want to hear that too. Because I read these comments and I learned from them at. Like if you believe ordinary people can push back when power gets petty. Subscribe if you want more stories where someone underestimated the wrong person, and tell me your own moment when you were written off and you still stood up anyway.